Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
So we're having a little bit of a minor reset going into Series 5. Man, Series 5, yeah.
Series 5.
Like,
I'm so proud of us.
It's a lot. It's a lot, you know. So we're having a bit of a reset. We want to keep things really practical and give those tips and guides even that you can follow step by step. But we also want to just take a moment to remember it's not just about what we're doing, but it's about why we're doing it and how we're doing it as well. After all, we are churches, not marketing agencies trying to do comms here. And going all the way back to the very first episode where we talked a little bit about the meaning of gourds and pomegranates. Obviously, we get asked it all the time.
You still do. What does that mean?
And the answer is, I mean, it sounds really pompous, but it's go and listen back to the first episode. But 1 Kings 7, when the temple is being built and Solomon brings in these really skilled craftsmen to create these ornate fixings of gourds that are going around the fountain and the pomegranates that are going at the top of the pillars, and they're all made out of bronze and they're beautiful, and it's really alien to us, but maybe there's sort of meanings of abundance and fertility and God's blessing there. But it actually says of these people that Solomon hired and sought out to bring into this building work that they were full of wisdom, they were full of understanding and skill. And that's what we want to see in the way that we and you do communications as your church. You know, it's the level of attention that was given to God's dwelling place then. That's what we want to see given to the comms now. We should have that same attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of the why really underpins everything that we want to talk about in aiming to do our best for God with the gifts he's given us. And I think that personally, if I've been given this opportunity to do these tasks and jobs and things, I want to do the best I can rather than just go, nah, that'll do.
Yeah. And so this attitude is why we talk about social media. It's why we talk about websites. It's why we talk about design and everything. It's why we do the podcast, because we want to see this. And I was reminded as we were thinking ahead of this episode of Acts 14. And right in the first verse there, it says that Paul and Barnabas spoke so effectively that a great number of people believed. And I think quite often we can skip over that because it kind of feels alien to us, this idea that they've done their job well enough that people have actually become Christians. And so without getting bogged down too deeply in the theology of that, because obviously it's under the influence of the Holy Spirit, he's worked both in Paul and Barnabas as they're speaking, as well as obviously in the people who have come to believe. But actually, let's not ignore what it says. They spoke so effectively that people came to believe there. And shouldn't we be seeking the same? You know, could this be said of our most recent poster that we've made for the church, or our latest Facebook post? If we're thinking carefully about each piece of the comms puzzle and where it fits into the strategy, you know, are those things effective? The purpose of a flyer isn't to give people every single detail about the church from the time it was founded to now and every aspect of our doctrine. It has an aim, which is to get people to do something. That might be get people to come along, might be get people to get in touch. Is our publicity being effective in doing that? You know, is that flyer so effective that people came to church? Is that design so convincing that people couldn't wait to find out more about what we're doing or the event that we're running?
Yeah, and it's a tricky one, I find, sometimes, because people think social media and digital and anything online is about becoming viral and, you know, it's
about the numbers.
It's all about the numbers. And it's not for me. I could talk about sort of all of that for a long time. But the reality is comms is a public-facing ministry. It is about how people see us and communicating effectively, because the better that we do it, the more people will see it, and the better it is in terms of quality and appeal and attractiveness. Actually, people will want to see more, and we should want to give the best impression and appearance to our communities.
And we should want it to be seen by as many people as possible. It's not about having the biggest Facebook page for the sake of it, but we want people to see it. That's why we're doing it.
Yeah, I think kind of like I suppose it's the flip side, is that for me, I'm in quite a small town and stuff. I would want my church to be known by everyone in our town. Obviously, it's different if you're in like a city or something, but at least people to know that church, that's their kind of vibe. Whereas if your community doesn't know that about you, I think that's quite a big problem.
Yeah, and some churches do have a wider community. You know, there are, certainly with the bigger churches, they have a reach that's far beyond their local immediate town or setting, you know. But our first calling generally is going to be the people immediately around us, and we want as many of them to see it as possible, because every time that they do, there's an interaction there. Now, that interaction might be just scroll by and ignore it. We hope it's not. It might be something deeper. It might just be reading it, going, huh, and then that's it. But every one of those interactions is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for people to think about our church, but also it's an opportunity to have that interaction with the gospel.
Exactly.
And that generally is going to be a positive or negative reaction, even in a minor way. Like there's not really a neutral reaction to that. So we are trying to make each one of those interactions positive if we can.
Yeah. I think the thing is we're called to communicate with purpose, you know.
Why are we doing this?
Exactly. And because the thing is that Jesus, when he gave the Great Commission, is to go out and make disciples of all nations. And his context and the disciples was probably to actually go and travel to those places. But actually, if our nations, being the streets down the road from you, don't know who Jesus is, or they don't even know about him, then that should be our first priority of like reaching the nations of around.
It's the why of why we're doing it, but it's also it's almost a warning. Like it's an encouragement to take it seriously what we're doing. When we have someone up the front who is preaching an evangelistic talk or they're teaching a sermon, we would expect that person to think really carefully about what they're going to say, but also about how they present it, how they say things. And that should be the same for our comms, not least because there's a bigger audience than just the people sitting in church. And that more public audience is also probably more likely to be antagonistic towards that message than the people sitting in the pews. I guess that very much depends on the sermon. So it's really important to be thinking about that, think about why we're doing it, think about how we're doing it. But also, as we said, it's not about numbers and it's not just about the end result. In Colossians 3, I'm going to read it out. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. How we do comms, as with all ministry, is really important. This isn't about perfection at any cost and just stamping on people to get people into church, you know. I don't think, if we think about, you know, burnout and these volunteers who are just completely done with it, I don't think God is impressed with the church that has the best branding or social engagement or even attendance if it's a church that's full of these people who are just exhausted, who are demotivated, who haven't got their heart attitude in the right place for why they're doing things. And we all have ups and downs in ministry. Like, this isn't that sort of criticism. Like, it shouldn't always be happy and easy, but we should be valuing people, and it isn't about getting social outreach or whatever at any cost.
But I think as well, the trouble for sort of a lot of the people I work with is, the volunteers, or it's the like leadership team, because, you know, there's no one else to hand it to. So actually they don't have the volunteers to be able to do this and support, because people think, oh, that should just be the minister doing that, or, you know, that's for the leadership team. I'm devoid of any responsibility in how the church is represented, because it's not my job to do that. But actually I think the church is the body of the people. It's not the building as such. So actually everyone should take a part in doing that. Yeah. But also, as wonderful as it might be to have fantastic graphic design and pictures and a website, if it all looks great, but actually your church isn't loving, isn't caring for the community, isn't combating social justice, isn't teaching and preaching and making disciples, I think it's kind of finding that balance, because as nice as that stuff is, we don't want to sort of do that at the cost of actually doing what we're meant to do.
Well, you've got to think, what are you inviting people into?
Exactly.
Like, if you are just bringing them into someone that doesn't actually care about the people that are in there, they just care about getting the people in there, then why are you doing it?
Exactly.
And,
Yeah.
just touching on what you said there about it being something for everyone, and also, building a team and bringing on volunteers to help with comms is something we kind of reflect on a lot. We're going to have an episode talking about that this series. But yeah, it's also a weird one in that comms is kind of communal as well as like communicating on behalf of the church. We each have that responsibility to communicate as well. But it's a big responsibility, to find that balance, to want to do things as well as we possibly can, and yet to not value it too much and almost not to care too much. And that's why we're talking about excellence today. We want to think about excellence rather than perfection.
Yeah.
This is about bringing people along with us rather than leaving them behind. It's about doing the best without valuing it having to be perfect every time.
And I think sometimes people panic that this poster, this thing isn't perfect, like this website isn't perfect, we can't put it up. And actually it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, because actually you haven't even got the basic information to put people out there. So something is better than nothing, but actually the more you do, the more you will improve, and therefore you improve your excellence. No one is going to achieve perfection anyway, so
it's just it has too many traps to fall into.
Exactly.
And then all of this is under the umbrella of knowing that it is God who brings about results, just as with the preaching in Acts, just as with everything that we put out. We need to be praying for results and praying that God works through us, because it's only through him that we can do it.
Yeah.
And it's only through his gifts that he's given us that we can do it as well. So it's not about trying to force things to happen, but relying on him.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a bit of a think about what excellence is, but it might also be helpful to have a reflection on what excellence isn't. Gosh, that's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah, we really should have picked an easier word for this episode, especially as the first one of the series, when we've not recorded for a while. So it's not, as we've said, it's not about excellence just for the sake of it. The same in the temple, the point of all of that, the point of the gold and bronze and everything that went into it was to bring glory to God. But we've also thought about mission and keeping that purpose of comms in mind of why we're doing it.
Yeah.
I also think it's really important to say that this isn't a one-size-fits-all thing.
Absolutely.
Each church is a different context. It's going to look very different. And so what is excellent for one church might be average for another church. It might be incredible and completely out of reach for another church, and that's okay. I was looking at some sort of worship leading material a while back, and one of the comments was, what are you aiming for with your music? Your aim isn't to sound like the recording. It's not to aim to sound like Bethel or Hillsong. Your aim is to sound like you, but to sound like the best version of you that you can achieve right now, without putting pressure on, without trying to go too far or getting your motivations wrong. What is the best that you can do to sound like you within your context, within your place?
Yeah. And it can be tricky within our human nature, but it's not about judging or calling people or all the churches out as if they're not doing a good enough job because they don't want to or something. It's running a church is really hard, and it can be hard not to have that automatic, like, they're not good enough, that's not what I like. But actually we have to really think about what we're prioritizing in what we're doing, and actually what people are able to do. It's difficult to put in the same effort in every aspect if actually you don't have the teams to do that, or because actually, do you know what, worship, maybe we just don't have the musicians, but we've got loads of kids and loads of people passionate about the kids, so actually we're going to put most of our effort in that. We'll just do the best that we can.
As a really practical comms example of that, churches who are in poorer areas are less likely to be putting loads of effort into their comms in terms of sort of website, social media. That's not to say they shouldn't, and they can still be very effective, and I've heard them be effective. But the priority is more going to be about getting out there into that immediate local community and getting to know people and building trust that way, because that is how people build trust in smaller communities. If you then shift that to not even a city, like a reasonable sized town, we've got a lot of commuters, people aren't spending as much time in their community. It's still happening, thinking about mums and dads on the school run, but there's a different way that people do community, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's good community. often that might be Facebook groups complaining about parking and all of the other middle class problems that we can come up with. But that is where community is happening. That is where people are gathering. And you may have more of a focus there. You know, even down to, I know our pastor has talked about changing the way that he presents his sermons and using slightly more PowerPoints than he might have done at his older church, just because the makeup of the congregation is different and the way that people learn is different. Even how we dress. You know, we're not coming in like a Versace suit. Did Versace make suits?
Yes.
Wrong person to ask it.
We're not coming in with big hats and the best Sunday wear.
And that. we're dressing appropriately for the context.
Yeah.
In the same way you would feel stupid if you turned up in t-shirt and shorts to a wedding. That can happen with comms as well. And so it's just trying to listen to what's around us and respond to that in how we communicate with people.
And I think we've talked about it before, and because I know I've done it as we were kind of coming out of the pandemic and going back into the buildings for, quote, normal services. And I had to tell people and those who were doing their church comms of saying, it's so easy to look at other churches and go, oh gosh, they've got like 3 cameras for their live streams, or they're doing a live stream and they've got someone there chatting. Yeah, that's amazing. If you can do that, that's really cool. But if you're a little village church and there's like 10 of you, you can record it, but you won't be live streaming because you haven't got Wi-Fi in the church. That's okay, because at least you're doing what you can do. But also you need to not look at that other church and go, oh my gosh, they're so much better, because they're not, because it's all about our heart and what we're doing and what we're doing with what we've got.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to not have kind of screen envy when looking at what other churches are doing, but actually you just kind of need to go, okay, that's cool. Well done, you.
Yeah. And again, excellence isn't perfection, and it is about people. And so whilst we want to aim for quality, that shouldn't sacrifice relationships within the church. It shouldn't cause hurt. What I will say to kind of asterisk that is that sometimes we use it as an excuse of, oh, we're not going to perfection. And it can sometimes be the case that actually there's too little effort put into things rather than too much. And that excuse of not aiming for perfection is actually really, we're not even aiming for good. Yeah. And that doesn't just go for comms. Like thinking in the music example, I hear that quite often in different churches. You know, if the music's too good, it's going to distract people from worship. Don't unpack that too much. But the reality is that it is much more likely in most churches that the music is going to be a distraction because it's not good enough. And that's not criticizing or judgmental, but sometimes if we don't put the effort into it, it is a distraction. So it's not about burnout. It's not about showing off and being the best, but we should also still be trying to make it as good as we can do. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's about aiming to sort of fulfill our calling and what we've been called to do, and just be the best in whatever we're doing, because it's all just to bring glory to God. And obviously, you know, there is a sense of responsibility on us doing it, but also it's okay to ask him to bless our efforts and support us and equip us to be able to do the best that we can. But again, it's all about our heart and thinking about who we're doing it for. So Colossians 3:23-24, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Which, I mean, you could use that for anything. It's hugely important in church, but actually it's not just about church, it's about everything that we're doing.
So as we bring it into land, when we're thinking about excellence, doing it in the right way, holding everything in the right way, how do we actually do it? Like, let's think about some practical tips.
So I think one of the first things really to think about in getting yourself centered of how to be excellent, but of how to aim for excellence, is learn actually what's good in your context. And I think context, we've said it already, but it's so important, of actually going, what can we aim for? it's all very well to want to be lights and, 3 guitars, 5 singers and a drum kit, but actually if you haven't got the people to do that, or to have a whizzy website with lots of videos on it, if you haven't got the resources to do that, it's okay if you don't do it. Aim for what you'd like to do, but actually be realistic of what's achievable now. Again, something's better than... Most of the time, something is better than nothing. But actually also think of, well, where would we like to go? We'd really like to actually live stream and have someone chatting. We can't do that right now. But actually, we do want to think about that and aim for that in the future, because we think that's really valuable.
Yeah. Own it as part of the vision, but it doesn't have to be the vision right now.
No. And do not put that pressure on yourself of going, oh my gosh, we're failing because we're not doing that.
Yeah.
I think it's, not even I think, it is important to be prayerfully focused, but also prayerfully strategic in what you do, of asking God to guide you as how best to invest your time and efforts, and have have his input in it, because actually he will bless what you're doing, but actually he might not want you to do go in one direction just because it's trending or because you're seeing the church down the road do it. But don't just sort of let stuff, we'll just see what happens and we'll just float along and not have a clear goal. Plan things out, have processes, go and listen to our earlier episodes about putting together a comm strategy and stuff. They don't have to be mega complicated, time-consuming documents to write, but actually they really think that they're worth the effort of doing them in making it so much easier for everyone going forward.
Yeah. And even at a slightly more zoomed out level, just writing down a plan of saying this is what we're aiming for, and maybe a couple of steps towards that. And one of those things will then hopefully be your communication strategy. And it doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't have to be massively detailed, but just having it is a good thing.
Yeah.
And as part of that plan, sharing it with other people, but also having these honest conversations with your volunteers and team members, and have them regularly. Find out how they're doing, not just how could you be doing your role better, but also how can you better help and equip them to do the role, but equip them just generally as well. So practically and spiritually. And just have that genuine care and concern for your people. And we're very much preaching to the converted on this, because we know that you care about your volunteers. We know that you're never aiming to use them or burn them out. But by asking them and giving them that permission to say, actually, this is too much. Or even, actually, I don't think this is a good direction that we're going in. And just listen and have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, as well as listening to your people, I think listening to others as well. So look around you, see what other people are doing, not as a comparison, like we've said, but to get a better idea of what excellence might look like in your context.
Inspiration.
Inspiration for sure. I think it might either be churches, it might be similar churches to you that aren't nearby, but it might also be businesses that are near you or other local organisations. This can give you an idea of, are we doing the right sort of thing, but also it can help guide you towards what sort of thing you should be doing and how to do it well. It's about keeping an ear open to the culture that we live in, and again, not to be shaped by it, but if we don't do that, we can't evaluate how we communicate and how we engage with people, because we're not actually paying attention to how people are engaging and communicating with each other.
And I do think it's getting harder. Look at that, learn it, take it on board and adapt to it, because stuff is changing so fast that it is challenging. But actually, I think that if you regularly do it, it makes it easier to pivot on things rather than ignore what's popular.
If you take a look once every 10 years at your strategy and what people are doing, then it's going to be very hard to change, but you'll already be too late and be left behind. And this isn't about like being the most up to date on the newest like trend in the algorithm, which can be helpful to stay on top of that stuff, but it's not about it. It's just about listening to what's going on around you. And it might be helpful to do this with other churches as well, like local churches, just saying what's going on in our area, like how can we be strategic around this, but also learning from other people online.
Absolutely.
We've obviously had Ben on, and we thought about the Church Comms Collective UK Facebook group. That's a great place to meet other people, to find ideas, but also to ask questions and get that support. And this is, that's a comms specific group, although there's all sorts of discussions there, but it also goes for stuff outside of comms, accountability and support and guidance and inspiration and help and education and resources and whatever you want to call it for all areas of ministry is really helpful. We are not meant to do this alone.
No. And it can be so easy to isolate or think that you're alone in this, but actually there's a lot of, everyone is kind of in the same boat. It's also really good to seek out resources. Obviously, it's tricky to know what you don't know, but try to look for places and resources and tools and advice that will help you with your communication. It's helpful if it's Christian stuff, because actually there is a context and an understanding and an intention behind it. Yeah. But actually there's not always necessary. Like, we've probably both follow influencers, but accounts and advisors and people who offer kind of industry updates and things. They're talking about sort of national, global, likely business related stuff, but there is so much that you can take and use in our own context.
And hold on to what's good.
Yeah.
And again, it can be hard to know where to go for these resources. And so something we're going to be doing later in the series is just highlighting probably too many of resources that we found helpful across lots of different areas. They will be sort of Christian comms resources, because the heart behind Galton Pomegranates has never been to say, we're the experts, we know everything on this, don't listen to anyone else. It's to say, like, how can we help you right now with a specific focus on small UK churches, but then when you're looking for other stuff, we want to be pointing you to people who are doing that as well and who are doing it really well. So yeah, come back and we'll cover that in a few weeks.
Yeah. So the last thing, probably the easiest thing to say, but the hardest to put into action, is to actually just ask the question of evaluating what you're doing as a church. And that's not for it to be, let's just do it once and that be it. And yep, we do social media, never talk about it for the next 5 years and stuff, but regularly. And that's for you to for you to decide what that frequency is. But look at what you're doing, ask what could be better. And that's both ask within your teams, we ask within yourself. And in one of our previous episodes, Laura said about asking, I think she said she invited her friends to come along to church. And I have to say, even I've asked my husband, who he doesn't come to church, but I say, what do you think of this? Because I think it's really important to get that non-Christian perspective of it. Because if he says, oh, it looks quite churchy, I'm thinking, well, then how can I expect my local community to want to come?
Yeah, and it's asking, what could we be doing better? Not out of a guilt mindset, but because we want to use what we've got to bring as much glory to God as we possibly can. And that's our prayer for you as we launch into this new series. We're so thankful to be even a small part of that journey for you as you're seeking to bring glory to God through in your context, in your church. So as ever, come back for our next episode. We've got a really exciting, really varied series ahead. Yes. If you haven't already, do subscribe so that you see every episode. And don't forget, you can send us a message at hello@gppodcast.uk. And we'll be back soon.